This video was brought to you by Mubi, a one-of-a-kind streaming service with handpicked cinema classics from all over the world. Get your first month for free at www.mubi.com/filmradar. I like stories with good old-fashioned roots that obey the rules. You know, the gun on the wall in the first act goes off in the third, and so forth. My favorite directors are the ones who know and embrace those rules, then pile something completely punk rock on top of them. That was a quote from Paul Thomas Anderson in an interview about his film Boogie Nights, and I have to say that I agree with him. Often the best films aren't the ones that completely break the mold, but rather films that know and embrace those that came before it, by delivering good old-fashioned storytelling. If we were to compare Anderson's Boogie Nights and Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, we can find a lot of common ground. They both follow the rise and fall of two young and ambitious men who find themselves a sense of belonging within a surrogate family, and whose greed and ego ultimately lead to their own self-destruction. While they may share much of the same DNA, each film does plenty to establish itself as its own unique film, showing us how a film can borrow many of its thematic or structural elements and still maintain its own creative voice.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
In both Boogie Nights and Goodfellas, we start with a young protagonist with a difficult life at home.
I'm not stupid!
Yes, you are!
Seduced by a new world and all of its possibilities. There's a kind of romance happening for the lifestyle, for the community, and it's understandable to see why. From both Henry and Dirk's perspective, these people have it all. The women, the cars, the house, the money, the connections, and they both just want to get a piece of that for themselves. Before long, they're more than just a participatory member, but a rising star who's come to earn the respect of everyone who surrounds them. They find something they're good at and embrace it. As Karen puts it in a line from Goodfellas, they weren't brain surgeons, they're regular blue-collar guys. So they claw their way to success the only way that they know how, even if it means losing their real family in the process. But everything is working out for our protagonists, or so it seems at first glance. Many seeds are planted in the first act of Boogie Nights that foreshadow the darker turn the film will ultimately take.
Because, I thought your acting stuff might bring some nice pussy into the place. Hello? Yeah, listen, I'm sorry, there's no Maggie again.
This is my lady friend. Darling, I'd like you to meet Jack Horner.
If you just want to see me jack off, it's 10, but if you just want to look at it, it's only 5.
That's my dream. To make a film that is true and right and dramatic.
At every point, it's all kept light, even breaking for moments of levity despite the darker context of some of the scenes.
I think maybe she did too much coke.
Oh, do you think so, Doctor?
Scorsese employs some foreshadowing of his own, if you can even call it that. Mostly we just see character traits established early in the story that become important later on, like Maury and Jimmy's money issues or Henry's lack of empathy towards Karen. But one scene in particular stands out as a great bit of foreshadowing.
What do you mean I'm funny? It's funny, it's a good story. It's funny. You're a funny guy.
What do you mean? You mean the way I talk? What?
Demonstrating Tommy's odd sense of humor and erratic, often violent behavior that we'll see make a return in the next section. The intensity builds and we're thinking that Henry might be in real danger here, until he realizes that it's just all a big joke.
Look it! I almost had him! You stuttering prick here!
But even when the scene quickly turns violent after the owner asks Tommy to pay his overdue bill, the laughs only get louder, which brings us into Act 2. The first act has gone quite well for our characters. The money is coming in, the family bond is still strong, and everyone's happy. They're living the dream just like they always wanted, until around the halfway point of each story when the metaphorical gun on the wall finally goes off.
This financial institution cannot endorse pornography.
Stop saying
Try to
that! Will you
understand.
quit
You've got
saying
to
pornography?
understand.
Why are you doing this
Please.
to me?
When was the last time you were arrested, and what was the charge?
Wait, fuck, hell, how much time is that? I'm sorry. Oh, fucking idiot!
They're so small. They're so cute and they're so adorable. I just can't help it when they're so cute and adorable.
$20.
That's what you get, faggot!
Your fucking films suck now anyway.
What started out as all fun and games has quickly turned into something completely different, with what Paul Thomas Anderson would call karmic debt starting to be paid back in full. This too is true for the characters in Goodfellas, though they don't seem to be as aware until it's far too late. Despite everything that's happened, Henry and Karen are in shambles after she finds out about his mistress. Henry's drug addiction worsens and he lies to Paulie's face to continue his Pittsburgh operation. And of course we all know what happens with Tommy's erratic behavior. But even worse than killing Spider, Tommy took out a made man, something that you just don't do in the Mafia. But Henry and the others still live in blissful ignorance, their karmic debt remaining unpaid. And after successfully pulling off the biggest heist in American history, their egos remain unchecked and life continues on as normal. Until paranoia sets in and Jimmy and Tommy start taking out everyone involved in the heist so that they can keep the cops off their trail and so they can hold on to the majority of the money. And even as the body count continues to climb, the lies, the betrayals, Henry still can't see the downfall of everything that he helped to create. At least, not yet.
Will you take part in my life?
Up until this point in both films, the characters have had their taste of reality but still continue to live in denial. Whether from pride or ego or a desperate attempt to retain their old lifestyle, they continue to make the same mistakes that led them down this darker path to begin with, until they both receive a sobering wake-up call in a pivotal scene that perfectly captures the feelings of anxiety and paranoia of two sleep-deprived drug addicts desperately clinging on to what power they still have, with Dirk and Henry finally receiving some karmic justice for their actions.
And in these scenes, Scorsese and P.T. Anderson are able to perfectly communicate these feelings of anxiety and paranoia in their main characters to the audience through their deliberate choices of cinematography, music, writing, and editing. A fast-moving camera versus a slow, methodical camera. Fast cuts versus long takes. Diegetic versus non-diegetic music. It's these types of decisions that create a mood of anxiety and paranoia in Goodfellas, and utter dread and claustrophobia in Boogie Nights.
Immediately following these incredibly tense scenes that challenge Dirk and Henry more than ever before, they return to the patriarch of their respective surrogate families in desperate need of their help.
But I got nowhere else to go, Paulie.
I just want to know if you can help me, Jack.
Dirk is forgiven and warmly embraced, welcomed back into the family, but Henry is turned away, only given a bit of cash to help him with his troubles. And this is where the two films really diverge. In Goodfellas, the family has all but fallen apart, with most of the crew already dead and the few remaining unsure of who they can still trust. So Henry enters a plea deal that will keep him out of prison and get him into the witness protection program to keep his family safe, turning his back on the closest thing to a family that he ever really had. But in Boogie Nights, the characters have suffered through the worst of it already, and we see something of a happy ending for everyone. Well, almost everyone. Both films can teach us a lot about the potential dangers of ego, or pride, or selfish tendencies. They each certainly have a lot to say about consequences, and how they may not always be right around the corner, but one way or the other, karma is coming for you in the end. It also serves to comment on the importance of family, and that even if they're not blood, it doesn't make those connections any less meaningful, and that you should never turn your back on them. But most of all, what I love about comparing and contrasting these two films is what it can teach us about writing. How if you boil a story down to its fundamental parts, most of the greatest stories ever told follow a similar pattern or structure, and these two films in particular certainly have more in common than most. But you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone claiming that Boogie Nights is a carbon copy of Goodfellas, because while they are made up of many of the same ingredients, from its tonal balancing act that mixes big laughs with extreme violence, sometimes even in the same scene, to their similar protagonists whose character arc follows roughly the same path, or its overlapping cinematic language like the infamous long takes or the era-appropriate pop soundtracks, they both earn their place in the history of cinema as some of the finest works from two virtuoso filmmakers at the top of their game.
And part of the reason Scorsese and P.T. Anderson excel as filmmakers is because they know how to effectively harness visual literacy in their films. Visual literacy is the concept that directors use the camera in order to communicate deeper story ideas and emotions to the audience. But instead of words, the vocabulary and grammar of this hidden language is expressed through the camera and everything else at the director's disposal. To continue this conversation, click the link below to watch my video and learn more about visual literacy and how directors Scorsese and P.T. Anderson used it to create different moods in Goodfellas and Boogie Nights.
Thank you to Mubi for sponsoring this video. Mubi is a one-of-a-kind streaming service that offers a refreshing take on the format. Gone are the days of endless scrolling and never actually watching anything. Mubi makes it a lot easier to find something worth sinking your teeth into because at any given time they have just 30 films available. Every day a new film is added and every day one is removed. They feature hand-picked classics from world-renowned filmmakers, so it's perfect for anyone trying to broaden their horizons with something new. You can get an extended free trial by heading over to www.mubi.com/filmradar, where you'll get your first 30 days free to try out the service. Again, that's www.mubi.com/filmradar for a 30-day free trial. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I was really excited to get to work with Adam on this one. For those who are not familiar, his channel is called Entertain the Elk. He makes video essays like I do about like movies and TV, but he also covers a lot more than just that. And so he makes really great videos, and if you haven't checked him out already, I highly suggest that you do that. On his channel, as we stated in this video, he also covers similarities between Boogie Nights and Goodfellas, but whereas I do kind of a overarching like narrative thematic breakdown, he kind of covers the specific cinematic language of two particular scenes, arguably the best scenes from either film. So you should definitely check that out if you are looking for more Boogie Nights Goodfellas kind of mashup content, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. I tried to challenge myself to keep the editing a little bit more minimalistic just because I felt that it fit better for the video that I was making, but for those of you who missed like the After Effects stuff that I normally do not worry, they're not going anywhere. I will definitely be doing more of that in the future. Thank you to Mubi for sponsoring this video, and thank you to you guys for watching and commenting and subscribing and liking the video, and a huge thank you to my patrons as always for helping to support me. Thank you guys so much for doing what you do. I'm gonna keep doing what I do and hope that you guys continue to enjoy it. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.